The year was 2347, and humanity had finally reached the stars. 12 solar systems now held human colonies, and millions of people lived on worlds that their ancestors could only dream about. Earth was still the heart of human civilization, but it was no longer alone. The United Stellar Command operated from Geneva Station, a massive structure that floated in orbit above the blue planet. From this station, the leaders of humanity coordinated everything that happened in human space. Admiral Daniel Mercer stood on the observation deck of Geneva Station and watched the endless darkness beyond the windows. He was 63 years old, with gray hair and a face marked by decades of military service. He had fought in the Martian rebellions 20 years ago and had commanded fleets across multiple star systems. He thought he had seen everything that the universe could offer. He was wrong. The message came without warning. Every communication system in human space received it at the same moment. The technology required to send such a transmission was beyond anything humanity possessed. Admiral Mercer watched the message play on the main screen of the command center, and he felt something cold settle in his chest. The creature on the screen was not human. It stood over 3 meters tall, and its body appeared to be made of living crystal. Light moved through its form in patterns that hurt the eyes to follow. When it spoke, the sound was like music and thunder combined into something that vibrated in the bones of everyone who heard it. High Overseer Akan introduced himself as the Supreme Commander of the Dominion. His species had ruled the Orion arm of the galaxy for over 40,000 years. They had watched humanity crawl out of its solar system and spread to nearby stars. They had observed and measured and judged. Now they had reached a decision. The terms were simple. Humanity would surrender all colonies beyond the Sol system immediately. Earth would pay tribute in rare minerals and resources for the next 1,000 years. Human ships would never again travel beyond their home system without permission from the Dominion. In exchange for this complete submission, that would allow humanity to continue existing. High Overseer Akan gave humanity 30 standard days to accept these terms. If they refused, the Dominion would respond with force that humans could not imagine. The message ended, and silence filled the command center. Commander Lisa was the head of intelligence operations for the United Stellar Command. She was 45 years old, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a mind that worked faster than most computers. Within hours of receiving the transmission, she had gathered every piece of information that human spies and censors had collected about over the past century. The report she presented to Admiral Mercer was not encouraging. The Dominion controlled over 2,000 star systems. Their military consisted of hundreds of thousands of warships. They had conquered more than 300 intelligent species using exactly the method they had just demonstrated. They would arrive, demand surrender, and then destroy anyone who refused. No species had ever successfully resisted them. Admiral Mercer read the report in his private quarters. He read it 3 times to make sure he understood every detail. Then he contacted Secretary General Hawkins, the leader of Earth's government. Hawkins was 70 years old, a former diplomat who had spent his life negotiating peace between human factions. He had helped end the Martian rebellions and had unified the scattered human colonies under a single government. He was not a military man, but he understood what was at stake. The Emergency Council meeting brought together representatives from every human colony. They appeared as holograms around the great table in Geneva Station, their images flickering slightly as quantum-link signals traveled across light years. The debate lasted for 18 hours. Some argued for negotiation. Perhaps the Dominion would accept lesser terms if humanity showed willingness to cooperate. Others pointed out that no species had ever negotiated successfully with the aliens did not make deals. They made demands, and they punished anyone who failed to meet those demands. Governor Maria Santos represented the colony, the largest agricultural settlement in human space. Over 2 million people lived there, growing food that fed dozens of other colonies. She stood before the council and spoke simply. Her people had built their homes with their own hands. They had raised families and planted crops and created a community from nothing. They would not abandon everything they had built because some alien empire told them to leave. Her words sparked something in the council. One by one, the representatives stood and declared their refusal. Earth would not bow. Mars would not bow. The colonies of Alpha and Tau would not bow. Humanity had struggled too hard to reach the stars, and they would not retreat back to their birth world like frightened children. Secretary General Hawkins called for a final vote. The result was unanimous. Humanity would reject the ultimatum. Admiral Mercer smiled when he heard the decision, but it was not a smile of joy. It was the smile of a man who knew something that others did not. He excused himself from the council and traveled to a location that appeared on no official map. The journey took 3 days through hyperspace. When his ship emerged, he found himself in an asteroid belt surrounding a dim red star. The system had no name, only a number in the astronomical databases. It had been chosen specifically because no one would ever think to look here. What Admiral Mercer saw in that asteroid belt made his heart swell with pride. Hidden among the rocks, invisible to any sensor that did not know exactly where to look, were the shipyards. And in those shipyards, taking shape over the past 15 years, were the ships that would save humanity. Chief Engineer Cole met Admiral Mercer at the main construction platform. Was 52 years old, a genius who had devoted his entire career to a single project. He had sacrificed everything for this moment. His marriage had ended because he could never speak about his work. His health had suffered from years of stress and endless hours. But now, looking at what he had built, he knew it had all been worth it. Admiral Mercer sent a single message back to the Dominion. It contained only 2 words. "We decline." The response would come soon. The Dominion had never accepted refusal from anyone. Their fleets would come, expecting to crush another primitive species that had dared to defy them. They had no idea what was waiting for them. High Overseer Akan received humanity's response in his command chamber aboard the flagship of the fleet. The chamber was vast, filled with floating crystals that sang with stored energy. Light danced through the walls in patterns that reflected his mood. When he read the 2 words that humanity had sent, the light turned dark red. "We decline." In 40 centuries of service to the Dominion, Akan had never received such a response. Lesser species always surrendered. They begged for mercy. They offered additional tribute. They did anything to avoid the wrath of the. But these humans had simply refused, as if they had any choice in the matter. Akan found it almost amusing. These creatures had only possessed faster-than-light travel for 300 years. They had colonized a handful of systems in a galaxy that contained billions. They were insects pretending to be giants, and he would teach them the price of their arrogance. He gave the order without hesitation. The 7th Annihilation Fleet would proceed to human space and demonstrate what happened to species that the Dominion. 2,000 warships began their journey, each one crewed by warriors who had never known defeat. The fleet moved slowly through hyperspace. There was no need to hurry. They wanted the humans to see them coming. They wanted every human colony to watch as the fleet approached, growing larger on their sensors with each passing day. Fear was a weapon, and the Dominion used it well. As the alien fleet traveled toward human space, Admiral Daniel Mercer arrived at the secret shipyards in the 442 system. Chief Engineer Cole waited for him at the main observation platform, his face tired but proud. The 2 men stood together and looked at what 15 years of secret work had created. The ships floating in the construction cradles were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were called the Titan-class Mega-Warships, and they were the most powerful vessels ever built by any species. Each Titan stretched over 15 kilometers from bow to stern. Their hulls were covered in armor made from alloys, materials so dense that conventional weapons would simply bounce off them. Their power came from contained singularity cores, artificial black holes that generated more energy than most stars, and their weapons were something that should not have been possible. Cole explained the technology as they walked through the corridors of the first completed vessel. The USS Leviathan was the flagship of the Titan fleet, and every system aboard her represented decades of research and development. The main weapon was called a graviton lance, and it worked by manipulating gravity itself. Gravity was the weakest of the fundamental forces, but it was also the most universal. Everything in the universe responded to gravity. The graviton lance concentrated gravitational waves into a focused beam that could tear apart the molecular bonds of any material. When fired, it did not burn or explode its target. It simply ripped the target apart at the most basic level. Captain Amy was the commanding officer of the USS Leviathan. She was 48 years old, with red hair that she kept short and practical. She had served in the Stellar Fleet for 25 years and had commanded 6 different vessels before being chosen for this assignment. When she first saw the Leviathan, she had stood in silence for 10 minutes, unable to speak. She gave Admiral Mercer a tour of her ship. The crew quarters could house over 12,000 personnel. The medical bay was larger than most hospitals. The fighter bays contained hundreds of smaller attack craft, and the main weapon systems ran along the entire length of the vessel, massive arrays of technology that hummed with barely contained power. Captain Peters commanded the USS Colossus, the second Titan-class vessel. He was younger than only 39, but he had proven himself in dozens of engagements against pirates and hostile forces. His ship was slightly smaller than the Leviathan, but carried experimental weapons that even the other Titan commanders did not fully understand. Back on Earth, Dr. Marshall worked day and night at the Geneva Research Institute. He was the lead physicist responsible for the theoretical foundations of human weapons technology. His equations had made the graviton lance possible, and now he was pushing even further into unknown territory. Marshall explained to Secretary General Hawkins what would happen when human weapons met ships. The alien vessels were impressive by galactic standards, powered by solar energy stored in their crystalline hulls, but they had never faced anything like the graviton lance. Their shields and armor were designed to stop energy weapons and projectiles. They had no defense against gravity itself. Commander Lisa monitored the fleet's progress through human space. Her intelligence network had agents scattered across the galaxy, and they reported everything they observed. The alien fleet was making no attempt to hide its approach. They broadcast messages to every human settlement they passed, promising destruction to those who resisted and mercy to those who surrendered. The messages had the opposite effect that they intended. Instead of breaking human morale, they strengthened it. People who had been uncertain about the decision to resist now felt angry. These aliens were treating them like animals to be herded, not like intelligent beings with the right to choose their own fate. Admiral Mercer gathered the commanders of all 12 Titan-class vessels for a final briefing. The ships were ready. The crews were trained. The weapons were tested. All that remained was to meet the enemy. Captain Ben Turner suggested a bold strategy. Rather than wait for them to reach the major colonies, the human fleet should intercept them in an uninhabited system. This would keep civilian populations safe and give them room to maneuver without worrying about collateral damage. The plan was accepted. The rendezvous point was set at the edge of the system, far from any planet or settlement. 500 support vessels would accompany the 12 Titans, providing medical ships and supply craft and smaller combat vessels for cleanup operations. Captain Amy stood on the bridge of the USS Leviathan as the fleet prepared to jump into hyperspace. Lieutenant Diana Cole, her executive officer, reported that all systems were functioning perfectly. The crew was nervous but ready. They had trained for this moment for years. The Titans activated their hyperspace drives and vanished from the secret shipyard. The construction crews watched them go, knowing that the fate of humanity traveled with those ships. Everything they had worked for, every sacrifice they had made, would be tested in the battle to come. In the darkness between stars, the two fleets moved toward each other. They came with 2,000 ships and 40 centuries of victories behind them. The humans came with 12 massive vessels and a desperate determination to survive. Neither side knew exactly what would happen when they met, but the galaxy was about to change forever. The Seventh Annihilation Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. High Overseer Akan had chosen this location deliberately. The system contained humanity's largest agricultural colony, a world covered in farms and forests where over 2 million humans lived and worked. Destroying this colony would break the spirit of the human resistance. The other colonies would see what happened and beg for mercy. Governor Maria Santos watched the alien fleet appear on her planetary sensors. 2,000 ships formed a wall of light and crystal that stretched across her sky. Each vessel was beautiful in its way, their hulls shimmering with stored solar energy, their shapes elegant and ancient. They looked like something from a dream, and Maria knew they had come to end everything she had built. She refused to order an evacuation. There was nowhere to run that the aliens could not follow. Her people would stay in their homes and trust that Admiral Mercer would keep his promise. He had told her that help would come. She believed him. High Overseer Akan broadcast his final warning to the colony below. The humans had 1 hour to surrender all government officials and military personnel. If they, the civilian population, would be spared. If they refused, the entire planet would burn. He had given this speech hundreds of times to hundreds of species. The response was always the same. They always surrendered in the end. The hour passed in silence. No surrender came. Akan felt a flicker of something that might have been respect. These humans were foolish, but they had courage. It would not save them, but it was worth nodding. He gave the order to begin bombardment. The first wave of ships moved forward, their weapons charging with golden light. In moments, they would turn the surface of the human world into glass and ash. Then the sensors screamed a warning. Gravitational distortions appeared at the edge of the system, readings so massive that the computers initially classified them as natural phenomena. No ship could produce such signatures. No engine could create such disturbances in space-time. But the distortions grew larger, and then they tore open like wounds in reality, and the human fleet emerged. The 12 Titan-class Mega-Warships took formation at the front of the human fleet. Behind them came 500 smaller vessels, but no one was looking at the support ships. Every eye and sensor in the system was focused on the Titans. High Overseer Akan stared at his display in disbelief. The human vessels were enormous, larger than anything the Dominion had ever built. Their energy signatures were impossible, reading higher than some stars. The sensors could not even properly measure their power output because the numbers exceeded the maximum values that technology could record. Admiral Mercer opened a communication channel from the bridge of the USS Leviathan. His face appeared on screens throughout the fleet, calm and steady despite the moment. He spoke slowly so that the translation systems would capture every word. He addressed High Overseer Akan directly. They had come to human space uninvited. They had threatened human lives and human homes. They had demanded submission from a species that had never done them any harm. This was wrong, and humanity would not accept it. Admiral Mercer offered the one chance to withdraw. If they turned their ships around and left human space, there would be no battle. No one would die. The two civilizations could find a peaceful way to coexist. But if they chose to fight, they would discover that humanity was not the primitive species they believed. Akan's response was immediate. He laughed, a sound like breaking glass that echoed through the communication channel. He called the humans arrogant insects who did not understand their place in the galaxy. Then he ordered every ship in his fleet to attack. 2,000 warships surged forward. Their crystalline hulls blazed with power as they charged their weapons. Solar lances and plasma cannons and gravity beams all prepared to fire. They had conquered 300 species with these weapons. They had never failed. Captain Amy stood at the center of the Leviathan's bridge and watched the enemy approach. Her crew worked at their stations with practiced efficiency, every person knowing exactly what they needed to do. Lieutenant Commander Davis, the tactical officer, reported that all weapons were ready to fire. Gave the order. The forward graviton lance of the USS Leviathan activated. The ship shuddered slightly as forces beyond normal comprehension moved through its systems. A beam of concentrated gravity erupted from the bow, invisible to the naked eye but clear on every sensor in the system. Space itself seemed to bend around the beam as it traveled toward the fleet. The lead battlecruiser was a vessel that had served the Dominion for 3,000 years. It had destroyed hundreds of enemy ships and bombarded dozens of planets. Its shields were the strongest the Dominion could build, and its armor was thick enough to withstand nuclear weapons. The graviton lance touched it, and it ceased to exist. The ship did not explode. There was no fire or debris flying outward. The molecular bonds that held the vessel together simply came apart. The battlecruiser dissolved into a cloud of atoms that spread across thousands of kilometers of space. One moment it was there, and the next moment it was gone. The void shuddered. Every sensor in the system registered the disturbance. It was not a metaphor or an exaggeration. The fabric of spacetime itself vibrated with the force of what had just happened. Ships far from the battle felt their hulls tremble. Planets wobbled slightly in their orbits. The universe had felt the wound. The other Titan-class vessels opened fire. 12 graviton lances carved through the formation. Singularity torpedoes followed, weapons that created temporary black holes on impact. The torpedoes detonated among the alien ships, and dozens of vessels vanished into brief points of infinite gravity before the artificial singularities collapsed. High Overseer Akan screamed orders at his fleet. Concentrate fire on the large human vessels. Overwhelm their shields with coordinated attacks. But the weapons that had conquered 300 species accomplished nothing against the Titans. Solar lances splashed harmlessly against armor. Plasma cannons left scorch marks that the hulls repaired within seconds. Gravity beams, the most powerful weapons the Dominion possessed, could not affect ships that generated their own gravitational fields. The battle became a slaughter. Vessels died by the dozens, then by the hundreds. The crystalline ships that had seemed so beautiful now shattered like glass ornaments struck by hammers. Escape pods launched from dying vessels, only to be pulled into the gravity wells created by human weapons. Governor Maria Santos watched the battle from her capital city. The night sky was filled with light as ships died in orbit. Her people stood in the streets and watched their salvation arrive. Some cried, others cheered. Many simply stood in silence, unable to believe what they were seeing. Captain ordered a ceasefire when the fleet was reduced to 300 vessels. The surviving ships had stopped fighting. They drifted in space, their weapons cold, their crews paralyzed by shock. She opened a channel to the alien flagship. Her offer was simple: surrender now and no more would die. They could take their survivors and leave human space forever. High Overseer Akan had lived for over 4,000 years. He had commanded fleets that conquered civilizations. He had never imagined this moment, standing on a damaged bridge surrounded by the wreckage of his fleet. His pride demanded that he continue fighting. His wisdom told him that pride was not worth the lives of his remaining crew. He accepted the surrender. The Battle was over. Humanity had won its first engagement against the most powerful empire in the galaxy, and the victory was absolute. News of the battle spread across human space within hours. The Quantum Link network carried reports and recordings to every colony and station and ship. People gathered in public squares and homes and watched the footage of the battle. They saw the Titan-class mega-warships emerge from hyperspace. They saw the fleet dissolve under weapons that made the void itself shudder. They saw the impossible become real. On Earth, celebrations erupted in every major city. People danced in the streets of New York and Beijing and Lagos and Sydney. Fireworks lit the skies above Paris and Tokyo. The fear that had gripped humanity for 30 days lifted like a morning fog, replaced by something that felt like hope. Secretary General Hawkins addressed the planet from Geneva Station. His speech was broadcast to every world under human control. He spoke of the courage of the fleet and the brilliance of the engineers who had built the Titans. He honored the sacrifice of those who had kept the project secret for 15 years, and he warned that the fight was not over yet. Admiral Mercer knew better than anyone that this was only the beginning. The 7th Annihilation Fleet had been one of dozens in the arsenal. The Dominion controlled thousands of star systems and commanded hundreds of thousands of warships. They would not accept this defeat quietly. They would respond with everything they had. High Overseer Akan sat in a detention cell aboard the USS Leviathan as the human fleet escorted the surviving vessels to the edge of human space. He had refused to speak since the surrender, his crystalline form dark and still. But his mind was working constantly, analyzing what had happened, trying to understand how his fleet had been destroyed so completely. The humans had developed weapons that the Dominion had never imagined. Their technology was not simply better than technology. It was different in fundamental ways. The graviton lance did not work on the same principles as any weapon the Dominion had encountered. It manipulated forces that they had barely begun to study. Commander Lisa interrogated Akan before he was released with his surviving crews. She learned more from what he did not say than from what he revealed. The Dominion was ancient and powerful, but they had grown complacent. They had not faced a real challenge in thousands of years. Their technology had advanced slowly because they had no competition to drive innovation. Humanity had done in 3 centuries what they had failed to do in 40,000 years. The surviving vessels jumped into hyperspace and disappeared. They carried recordings of the battle and samples of human weapon signatures. The Dominion would study this information and try to develop countermeasures. They would have time to prepare before the next engagement. But Commander's intelligence network was already reporting alarming developments. Long-range sensors detected massive fleet movements throughout the Orion Arm. The Dominion was mobilizing forces from every sector of their territory. Over 50,000 warships were converging on human space, more firepower than any species had ever assembled in one place. Admiral Mercer called an emergency meeting of the fleet commanders. Captain Amy of the Leviathan attended, along with Captain Peters of the Colossus and the commanders of the other 10 Titan-class vessels. Dr. Marshall joined via quantum link from Earth to provide scientific analysis. The situation was grim. Humanity had 12 Titans and 500 support vessels. The Dominion was sending 50,000 warships. Even with their superior weapons, the humans could not fight a war of attrition against such numbers. If each Titan destroyed 1,000 enemy ships, they would still be overwhelmed by the survivors. Dr. Marshall presented data from the battle. The graviton lances had performed beyond expectations, but they required enormous amounts of energy to fire. Each Titan could only fire its main weapon once every 30 seconds before the power systems needed to recharge. Against 2,000 ships, this had been enough. Against 50,000, it would not be. Captain Ben Turner proposed an alternative strategy. Turner was 51 years old, a specialist in unconventional warfare who had spent his career finding ways to defeat stronger enemies. He had studied every conflict in human history and many alien wars as well. He understood that sometimes the only way to win was to change the nature of the fight. Rather than wait for the Dominion fleet to arrive in human space, humanity should strike at the heart of the enemy. If they could reach Prime, the Dominion, they could force the aliens to negotiate. No empire in history had survived the loss of its capital. The psychological impact would be greater than any military victory. The plan was dangerous. Prime was located deep in Dominion territory, surrounded by hundreds of star systems filled with military installations. The human fleet would have to travel further than any human vessel had gone before. They would be outnumbered and alone, with no hope of reinforcement or retreat. Admiral Mercer listened to the debate among his commanders. Some argued that the plan was suicide. Others believed it was their only chance. Captain pointed out that the Dominion expected humanity to fight defensively, to protect their colonies and wait for the inevitable assault. Attacking the enemy was the last thing they would anticipate. Secretary General Hawkins was consulted, and he gave his approval. The people of Earth had chosen to resist rather than surrender. They understood that this choice came with risks. If the fleet failed, humanity would face destruction. But if they succeeded, they might achieve something that no species had accomplished in 40,000 years. They might break the Dominion's hold on the galaxy. The fleet prepared for departure. Captain commanded the USS Sovereign, one of the Titan-class vessels. Her ship had been completed only 3 months before the ultimatum arrived. The crew was young and eager, and they had watched their sister ships win the Battle of while sitting in the shipyard. Now they would have their chance to prove themselves. Chief Engineer Cole worked without sleep to upgrade the fleet's systems before departure. He installed new power regulators that would allow the graviton lances to fire more frequently. He reinforced the containment fields on the singularity cores. He did everything possible to give the fleet an edge in the battle to come. The day before departure, Admiral Mercer walked through the corridors of the USS Leviathan. He stopped to speak with crew members, learning their names and their stories. Many had joined the fleet knowing they might never return home. They had families and loved ones waiting for them on distant worlds, but they had chosen to serve because they believed in something greater than themselves. Lieutenant Diana Cole, executive officer of the Leviathan, found the admiral on the observation deck. She was 29 years old, the daughter of Chief Engineer Cole. She had grown up knowing that her father was working on something secret and important. Now she understood what that something was, and she was proud to serve on the ship he had built. They talked about what lay ahead. The journey to Prime would take several days through hyperspace. They would emerge in a system that no human had ever visited, facing defenses that no human had ever tested. Everything they had worked for would come down to a single battle. Admiral Mercer looked at the stars through the observation window. Somewhere out there, the Dominion was gathering its forces. Somewhere out there, the fate of 2 civilizations would be decided. He did not know if humanity would survive the coming conflict, but he knew they would face it standing tall, as equals rather than subjects. The fleet jumped into hyperspace. The void swallowed them, and they vanished into the unknown darkness between the stars. The journey through hyperspace lasted 7 days. 7 days of preparation and anticipation, of checking weapons and reviewing battle plans, of wondering if they would ever see home again. The crew of the human fleet spent those days doing what soldiers have always done before battle. They wrote letters to loved ones. They shared meals with friends. They prayed to whatever gods they believed in. Admiral Daniel Mercer spent much of the journey alone in his quarters, studying maps of Prime and the defensive systems that surrounded it. The Dominion was ancient, covered in structures that had stood for 100,000 years. Its orbit was filled with defense platforms and shipyards and the palaces of the ruling elite. Over 10,000 warships protected the system at any given time, and that number would increase as the human fleet approached. Captain Amy ran endless drills aboard the USS Leviathan. Her crew practiced emergency repairs and damage control and evacuation procedures. They trained until their responses became automatic, until they could perform their duties without thinking. When the battle came, there would be no time for hesitation. The fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system. What they saw made even veteran officers pause. The planet itself was visible as a distant point of light, but between them and that light was a wall of warships that seemed to stretch into infinity. The Dominion had gathered every available vessel to defend their capital. Over 10,000 warships formed the first defensive line, with more arriving from hyperspace every minute. Admiral Mercer stood on the bridge of the Leviathan and looked at the tactical display. The numbers were not good. Even with their superior weapons, the human fleet would be fighting against overwhelming odds, but they had not come this far to turn back. He opened a communication channel to the Dominion command. His face appeared on screens throughout the alien fleet, broadcast to every ship and station in the system. He did not speak to the military commanders. He spoke directly to the leader of the civilization. The Grand Matriarch of the Dominion was ancient beyond human understanding. She had ruled her species for 10,000 years, watching empires rise and fall, seeing civilizations be born and die. She had ordered the conquest of countless worlds and the subjugation of hundreds of intelligent species. In all that time, no enemy had ever threatened her. She appeared on the communication screen, her crystalline form glowing with colors that human eyes could barely perceive. Her voice was ancient and terrible, resonating with harmonics that spoke of ages beyond counting. She demanded to know why these humans dared to come to her domain. Admiral Mercer answered simply. Humanity had not wanted war. They had asked only to be left in peace, to live their lives and explore the stars. The Dominion had rejected that request. They had sent fleets to destroy human colonies. They had murdered human citizens. Now humanity had come to end the conflict, one way or another. The Grand Matriarch laughed, and the sound was like mountains crumbling. She ordered her fleet to destroy the human vessels. 10,000 warships began to move forward, their weapons charging with deadly intent. Admiral Mercer gave the order to attack. The battle for Prime was the largest engagement in galactic history. The 12 Titan-class Mega-Warships plunged into the Dominion fleet like giants among children. Graviton lances fired continuously, each shot destroying one or more enemy vessels. Singularity torpedoes created chains of black holes that consumed entire squadrons. The human support ships followed the Titans, finishing off damaged enemies and protecting the larger vessels from concentrated attacks. Captain Peters led the USS Colossus into the heart of the Dominion formation. His ship took damage from dozens of enemy weapons, but the armor held. He positioned the Colossus between two Dominion and fired graviton lances in both directions simultaneously. The devastation was total. Lieutenant Commander Davis coordinated the targeting systems for the entire human fleet. His station aboard the Leviathan received data from every vessel and processed it in real time. He identified priority targets and assigned them to specific ships, ensuring that no Titan wasted its firepower on vessels that others could handle. The Dominion defenders fought with courage and determination, but they were outmatched in every way that mattered. Their weapons could not penetrate human armor. Their shields could not stop human weapons. They died by the thousands, their crystalline ships shattering and dissolving, their crews joining the endless darkness of space. Captain led a strike force of 3 Titans directly toward the orbital defense platforms. These massive structures protected the planet below, their weapons powerful enough to threaten even the Mega-Warships. The USS Sovereign took point, her shields absorbing tremendous punishment as she closed the distance. Targeted the primary shield generator of the largest platform. Her graviton lance struck true, tearing through the structure and ripping it apart from the inside. Without shields, the other platforms were vulnerable. The strike force destroyed them one by one, opening a path to the planet below. The battle lasted for 6 hours. When it ended, over 9,000 Dominion warships had been destroyed. The orbital defenses were gone. The shipyards were rubble. The path to Prime was clear. Admiral Mercer contacted the Grand Matriarch again. His fleet floated above her, weapons charged and ready. He had the power to destroy everything below him, to burn a civilization that had stood for 100,000 years. The Grand Matriarch waited to hear his demands, expecting the same brutal terms that her species had imposed on so many others. What Mercer offered instead surprised everyone who heard it. He did not demand tribute or territory. He did not require the Dominion to surrender their weapons or disband their fleets. He did not seek to conquer or humiliate or destroy. He offered peace. Humanity wanted only to exist as an equal member of the galactic community. They wanted to explore the stars and build colonies and trade with other species. They wanted the Dominion to end their policy of subjugation and conquest, to treat other civilizations as partners rather than subjects. In return, humanity would share their technology and their knowledge, helping to advance all species rather than dominating them. The Grand Matriarch was silent for a long time. She had ruled through fear and force for 10,000 years. She had believed that power was the only thing that mattered, that strength gave the right to command. Now she faced a species that had proven stronger than her own, yet they did not seek to enslave her people. She accepted the terms. The Treaty of was signed 3 days later. The Dominion acknowledged humanity as an equal partner in galactic affairs. They agreed to end their policy of forced conquest and to release the species they had subjugated over the. In return, humanity would share the secrets of their graviton technology, helping other species defend themselves against future threats. Admiral Mercer stood in the grand chamber of the palace as the treaty was completed. He had spent his entire career preparing for war, and now he had won the greatest peace in galactic history. It was a strange feeling, one he was still trying to understand. Captain Amy found him on the observation deck of the USS Leviathan as the fleet prepared to return home. Lieutenant Diana Cole stood with her, both women looking out at the alien stars that surrounded them. Asked the Admiral what came next. They had defeated the most powerful empire in the galaxy. They had proven that humanity could not be intimidated or conquered. What would they do with that power? Mercer thought about the question for a long time before answering. Humanity had reached the stars because they wanted to explore, to discover, to understand. They had built the Titans because they needed to survive. Now that survival was assured, they could return to their original purpose. The galaxy was vast, filled with wonders that no one had ever seen and mysteries that no one had ever solved. Humanity would explore it, not as conquerors but as seekers of knowledge. They would meet other species and learn from them and share what they knew. They would push the boundaries of what was possible and discover new boundaries beyond those. The void that had shuddered under their weapons now stretched before them as an invitation. Every star was a destination. Every planet was a question waiting to be answered. Every mystery was an opportunity to grow. Lieutenant Cole smiled as she listened to the Admiral speak. She was young, with her entire career ahead of her. She would see things that no human had ever seen. She would go places that no human had ever gone. The universe was infinite, and humanity had just taken its first real steps into the endless dark. The fleet jumped into hyperspace, leaving the Dominion capital behind. They carried with them a treaty that would reshape the galaxy and a promise that humanity would never be subjugated by anyone. The arrogance that had ruled the stars for 40,000 years had finally fallen, and in its place was something new. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same.